2 weeks ago, we were at another restaurant establishment having our, it was my third or fourth Chamber of Commerce Little Village meeting. We were talking about the economic development on 26th Street here in Little Village, the heart of Little Village community. And a week prior to that, the alderman and I visited Zapata School, the new modernization that's going on, but not only the modernization of the school, but also talking about a new park associated with that school. And like all good aldermen, but he's a great alderman, he squoze a new playground out of me on that visit. It's a costly visit anytime you're with Alderman Munoz, and you should know that he does a great job representing the community here in Little Village. So a little fact that everybody should know. Outside of Michigan Avenue, I call 26th Street the two magnificent miles. It produces more sales revenue for the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois than any other street but Michigan Avenue. And it's the little businesses and the small businesses and the mom and pop restaurants and all the other pieces of the business that make up Little Village that drive the economy and the quality of life in Little Village. And a lot of people, when the alderman, myself, and Andy Zopp were advocating raising the minimum wage, oh, you're going to knock out small businesses, you're going to destroy small businesses. Well, first of all, we used to pay people $8.25 an hour. Not we, but that was the minimum wage. Starting July 1, it goes up to $12, a 45% increase. No parent who works full-time should raise a child in poverty. That should be a basic. And the incomes, I just like everybody to know, all the people, all the naysayers, all the cynics, all the critics, jobs are up in Chicago. The minimum wage is up in Chicago. Poverty is down in Chicago, and 36,000 fewer kids are in poverty today than when we started when we were $8.25. Now everybody should know, as the chart shows you, the minimum wage in Illinois is still $8.25. This chart right back here. That's the difference. The blue is Chicago, the red is Illinois. If you work in Chicago and starting right here on Sunday, it goes up to $12. Start at $8.25. The next year, it will be $13. In Illinois, they don't have an increase in the minimum wage. Chicago, we're ensuring that if you work, work pays. That should be a basic. I worked for President Clinton when there was a minimum wage increase. When I was a member of Congress, I voted for a minimum wage increase. We did a commission. There are some people that disagreed with it. But we pushed ahead, and all the dire predictions that the sky was going to fall, businesses were going to shutter, jobs were going to flee, the opposite. And more importantly than the jobs grew, people's income grew, and poverty overall, and poverty specifically among children, declined. There's other things that went into it. A healthy growing economy, the expansion of the earned income tax credit, that also complements the minimum wage. But more importantly than anything else, in a home where there's a person working for a minimum wage and a child, we all know this, is socialized, that child now grows up in a home knowing that work counts and work pays rather than the opposite. And that's a very important value you just cannot study just by looking at a chart. Now I do want to say what is complementary to this is not just the earned income tax credit. At Zapata School and other schools starting this fall, if you work, we're going to also ensure your child has full day free universal pre-K. So that if you work, your child is not penalized and not having early childhood education. If you're poor, there's Head Start. If you work, you're left up to a system that costs $13,000 a child. We're going to make sure it's free, it's full day, and over a 4-year period universal, but we're going to start with working parents to complement so you can be both a good employee and a good parent. And it's not in opposition. And Zapata School is an example, and the neighborhoods of Little Village and the community are going to be complemented to that area and in that investment. And I think this is important also to note that in the period of time the minimum wage went up, a dozen eggs back in 2014 was $2.99. If you go out, that's about what it is today. But that's not true for the minimum wage. The minimum wage is now $12 an hour, not $8.25. Back in 2014, a gallon of milk was about $2.79. It's about that price today. Meaning as the minimum wage has gone from $8.25 up to $12, milk and eggs, that price has stayed stable. That's not true about energy, and we know that. So it's not exactly always the same. So we have to ensure that people who work at the minimum wage are getting a raise, their children are getting daycare, universal pre-K, and we're making sure that more importantly than just the wages, we're also growing jobs. We're growing jobs throughout the city of Chicago. The alderman and I were not far from here when Unilever expanded their mayonnaise factory. We're not far from here where we also opened up the People's Gas training facility for people that are going to be pipe fitters throughout the city of Chicago. So these are all complementary investments. This is an example from Zapata to Unilever to People's Gas to this restaurant to having a marketing strategy around the Midwest for the little village community of growing jobs, growing the minimum wage, and making sure that if you work, work pays here in the city of Chicago. It's now my honor because a lot of the complaints sometimes or critics are those who say that small businesses get worse affected, and Kenya runs our small businesses and is chief administrator for that. I do then, though, want to make one comment that Laura talked about. Because you can do all the other things, but miss out also on an important value. Because the minimum wage is not just economics, not just a pocketbook. It's whether you stand by the principle of work. That's a value. It's also a value in the sense of what we say to immigrants from around the world who come to Chicago. And today the Supreme Court made a decision I disagree with. And I say that by also saying one other thing. Elections count. Had we had a different election, we'd have a different Supreme Court. That was a decision that was 5-4. And I can tell you a different president would have nominated a different Supreme Court justice. A former president had an opening and made a nomination that I think also that decision would have been different. I don't agree with this decision, but we are a nation of laws, and therefore it's the Supreme Court. But I think, very importantly, to complement the values that go behind an increase in the minimum wages, the values that also reflect that we are a nation of immigrants who come here, work hard. Almost half the new businesses and small businesses are started by immigrants. You cannot be pro-small business and not pro-immigration. And so I say that by letting know that I disagree with this decision, and I know this is the first result of you can see of a consequence of a decision, because with a different president you would have a different nominee, and a different nominee you would have a different decision. First of all, you would never have had a travel ban. Hillary Clinton would not have approached it that way. That said, you'd not have a Supreme Court that would have ruled 5-4 the way they did today.